Thank you. Good afternoon. It will not have escaped your attention that this is the 30th anniversary of the Writers' Conference. And as hard as that is to believe, it is true. It's also the 30th anniversary of the publication of Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. Earlier I heard Clarissa Ward speak, and she talked about, she's a journalist, she's a war reporter, and she talked about the obligation and the joy of trying to make sense of the world through stories. And I can't think of anybody who does that in quite the same way as Anne Lamott does it. She makes sense of the world through stories that are humorous, that are touching, that are deeply felt. You all know, I'm sure, what she's like, and you'll hear more of her in a second. I want to say just one thing before I bring her out, and John Burnham Schwartz, who is the conference literary director. In my mind, there is no conference without Annie. I mean, if I think of the conference, I think of Annie. And it's 30 years is a long time. Some of us were a lot younger then. And to think of those days on the campus of the community school and to think of Annie being there is truly heartwarming. So, with that in mind, please welcome John Burnham Schwartz and Anne Lamott.
Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you. And it's great to see you.
It's great to see you.
And
and you.
I'll just say before, Annie's going to start with a little reading from Bird by Bird that we discussed. I had the privilege of going back and rereading this book almost 30 years after I first read it. All these years that I've been a writer too, and it was such a wonderful experience. Everything in it, if anything, to me seems more true, wiser, funnier, more mordant, and it's
mortgaged?
Very mordant.
Oh, mordant. I
Yes.
thought you said more mortgaged, and
Yeah.
I thought that's like New York literary talk.
You bet it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very rare to find something whose value just continues to grow about a subject that everyone seems to have an opinion on. And Annie has been living that life and doing that work ever since. And one of the reasons for this conversation was I just thought it would be really wonderful experience to revisit not only the book, which you know since you wrote it, but the experience of writing afterwards and how those experiences look, and the thoughts she had and the memories that go into this look to you now. She just published your 20th book somehow, which #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. And it's pretty amazing. It's a wonderful book. And so in light of all that time and all that work and all those stories, I think we just go back and talk about writing and life. So if you'd start with just, this is from the chapter, False Starts.
I also want to say I'm going to stick around at the signing table afterwards, but I can't personalize because my hand will be ruined, but I'll sign anything you write. So you can put literally anything, and I will sign my name. But I just want to give you a heads up.
We actually have an insurance policy. So, yeah, anyway, go ahead.
This is from a chapter called False Starts. Sorry. I found out something important about false starts when I began accompanying some members of my church to a convalescent home once a month, where we were conducting a worship service. After that first dismal visit, I thought I knew who the residents were and what they were capable of, what they were all about. If I had started to write, I would have written about them with confidence, and I would have been all wrong. I have been going there for 4 years now. I don't ever really look forward to it, but I keep going back for reasons I do not quite understand. Perhaps I am subconsciously hoping it will get me into the junior league someday. Still, the moment I walk in and smell those old people again and find them parked in the hallway like so many cars abandoned by the side of the road, I start begging God not to let me end up like this. But God is not a short order cook, and these people were once my age. I bet they used to beg God not to let them end up as they have. At first, many of them look strangely alike, just as many people at the Special Olympics bear a familial resemblance to one another. Then you start to notice that some have lambskin chaps or blankets, some have manicures, some have the teeth they were born with, some have sores, some don't, some were clearly beautiful in earlier days, some weren't, some seem to know where they are, some remember lines from the Lord's Prayer, some sleep, some try to sing along on the simple hymns and clap in rhythm. But even the ones who clap all clap differently. Some clap along frailly, almost in silence. One woman claps with great gusto, as if she's at a polka. One old man claps once, as if to kill a fly. My favorite, a woman named Anne, like me, is someone I'd first pegged as a muzzy, emaciated woman who smelled of urine and baby powder without a whole lot going on inside. She isn't what I thought, though. I still don't know who she is, but I do know now who she isn't. She can never remember my name. And when I tell her every month, she pantomimes smiting her own forehead. Then we both smile. I suspect she is pulling my leg. When we sing Amen, she always sits with her hands in her lap, palms cupped together as if there might be a tiny bird inside. With each clap, she moves her hands a tiny bit apart, as if she really does want to clap along, but at the same time, she doesn't want to let the bird get out. If I'd written about her and the other old people after the first few visits, the smells and confusion would have dominated my description. I would have recorded our odd conversations. One woman is convinced we went to school together. Another once asked if baby Sam was a dog, and I would have tried to capture my sense of waste. Instead, I continued to go there, and I struggled to find meaning in their bleak existence. What finally helped was an image from a medieval monk named Brother Lawrence, who saw all of us as leaves in winter, with little to give, stripped of leaves and color and growth, whom God loves unconditionally anyway. My priest friend Margaret, who works with the aged and who shared this image with me, wanted me to see that even though these old people are no longer useful in any traditional meaning of the word, they are there to be loved unconditionally, like trees in the winter. When you write about your characters, we want to know all about their leaves and colors and growth, but we also want to know who they are when stripped of the surface show. So if you want to get to know your characters, you have to hang out with them long enough to see beyond all the things they aren't. You may try to get them to do something because it would be convenient plot-wise, or you might want to pigeonhole them so you can maintain the illusion of control. But with luck, their tendrils will sneak out the sides of the box you've put them in, and you will finally have to admit that who they are isn't who you thought they were.
Thank you. I love that passage because it makes me immediately think back to my own assumptions that I always make for my own neurotic reasons when you come in, and how it gets in the way of paying attention, real attention. And I wonder, so you wrote this, came out 30 years ago. You had just published Operating Instructions, another one of my favorite books, the year before, about the first year of Sam's life, your first year as a mother. And those two books together, I always think of them together because they are also not just a book about motherhood or a book about writing, but they are objectively about life. lessons in life or discoveries about what it really is. And I wonder, in the realm of paying attention as a writer and a person, between where you were when you wrote this and where you are now, what kind of journey has that been for you? Do you feel that the quality of, or the process, the experience of paying attention, what you've learned has changed, or does it seem very much in the way that you described it then?
Well, that's a great question. I've been writing, I don't know if some of you have read these. I'm writing pieces on being older in the Washington Post. And I was really, they asked me last year or two, and I was so insulted because I was only 69 at the time, and now I'm 70. And, but I've written a lot about the long answer to that, which is that it's so much easier to be older than it is to be younger. And it's so much easier when a lot of the hustle and the strive drops away. You know, in all those years, your 20s and 30s and 40s, you're trying to figure and propel the plot forward. It's like the forward thrust of trying to get known and trying to get more known and trying, you know, and boy, it just drops away by about, for me, in my late 50s. And I think it's partly because by the time you're older, or say 50 even, people your own age have died, you know, and you start to get serious about this thing, about being here. And so what happened was I slowed down and my mind slowed down because it had to, because I can't keep track of as much before. And so, like, now I'm heading over here, and I'm not thinking a million thoughts. I'm thinking, is my fly zipped up? Was I supposed to bring a book? And so I really am. And the judgment quiets down. And what the reason I think you asked me to read False Starts was because when you're younger, it's just like a pinball machine of instant judgment. This person is this person isn't, this person can further my career, this person not, you know, and it's just constant judgment. Oh, I don't like that person. I like that person. I'd like to know that, you know, and it just starts to drop away. It's also, you know, I've been sober for 38 years, and it just gets that your perspective changes, you know, that your level, and I know you know this is true too, although you're younger, is that your gratitude takes a much more prominent place in your life, that you're just going around going, whatever you believe in or don't, you're just going, thank you, thank you, thank you. Like, not just because you're at Sun Valley, you know, but that you're here and that you have this unbelievably precious and often weird, sometimes difficult and often very blessed life. And so when I wrote the book, I guess I would have been about 40. I wrote it when I was in my late 30s. I had a little boy, and everything was about being busy and broke and being a single mother. And it was like, that was the rat exercise wheel. And then it got easier, you know, and Sam got a little older, and I had operating instructions from bird by bird, and so I started to be able to have some money, and that made everything a lot easier as a single mother. And but my perspective from in my 40s was really about the strive and hustle. Yeah. You know, and in my early 50s, it was like, okay, this person's really good for this person, and this, I want to get there. Well, we didn't have phones. Remember, I didn't at 50. But anyway, and it's a blessing of old. You know, there's grace in myopia, and as your vision is starting to get a little blurry, which it will, and I'm looking forward really soon. I get the cataract surgery. I don't mean to make those of you who haven't been scheduled yet feel bad about your life, but when you get scheduled, it means you're going to be able to see a lot better. But my inside vision, you know, you get this kind of spiritual or psychic myopia, and there's blessing in that, because I don't see instantly anymore, because I'm not in strive and hustle, and it's a little blurrier, and I just feel because I feel different about other people, I feel very different about myself. So when I sit down to write, the jungle drums aren't beating, and I'm not thinking, okay, I gotta do. I'm thinking, I'm really nice to myself, like I would be with you if you're having a hard time and we were hanging out in this. I'd say, you know what? Just tell me that one passage that you told me over dinner.
Yep.
Just do that. That's all you have to do, right? And I would talk to you in a really friendly and familiar way, knowing exactly what it's like. That we all have all writers have equal proportions of grandiosity and terrible self-esteem, and I would say, I know where you are. Tell me that one story. I love that. Everyone loves that, So I've gotten to be that way a lot more with myself. And I would say that's the biggest difference. Also, when I wrote Bird by Bird, we didn't have computers, or I didn't have computers. And I've learned since you should never name a main character Brian, because spell check will change it to brain, and no one will notice it. I'm not kidding. The copy editor may not notice it because their eye will just glance off of it. That's pretty much all I know since that book came out.
That's a great takeaway. Thank you. Does this make you think back? Because this book begins with about your parents and about your growing up and about your father being a writer and what he was like, what his daily routine was like, his ritual, how he lived and worked, and how that looked to you. And I wonder if, what you were just talking about, whether it's made you, and now you're a grandmother. I saw, you're unbelievable. And you go back and you start thinking about them again, or in a different way, and how that does or doesn't connect with the writing you're doing now.
Oh, that's really interesting. I feel like I could write the answer to that.
All right.
But the short answer is that my mother's grandma name was Nana, and my mother was a handful, and she was English from Liverpool. And there's special 12-step programs for the mothers, for the children of the English. I know some of you are in that program. And she was very hard for me. And my son just adored her because he didn't have a position. She was just his Nana. And then, of course, my son had a position with me because he was my son. And they do. All parents are a mortification to their children. And then Sam had a baby named Jax, who's 15 today. I wish he was here, but he'd die if we sang happy birthday. But it is his birthday. And I took on the grandma named Nana in honor of my mother, and also in remembering how tender and gentle Sam was with my mom, who was really so annoying. I know can be so annoying to Sam, but I'm not very annoying to Jax, And so I learned something. I learned, becoming a grandmother, a whole realm of my mother that I hadn't known on a molecular level, like how she had felt about Sam, like how different it is to be a grandparent, once removed. I mean, you adore them, and then, they go home. So that's nice. But I learned this whole realm. I learned a huge part of who my mother was. That she was like that Brother Lawrence thing, or that she was worthy of being unconditionally loved by a small boy and then a teenage boy. And whereas I had been kind of defending against her, And so with that came, because she'd say this weird shit, after, let's see, I'd written about maybe 5 or 6 books after operating instructions while she was still alive. And whenever there was a small crowd around, she'd say really loudly, "What was the name of that book you wrote that I liked?" And I'd be like, and then, and that's what I saw. And so now it's like, it's like the Russian nesting dolls, taking off our own the outer dolls, and now taking off my mother's outer dolls and seeing that really, really dear old English lady who, it was just, my father was a writer, and I think my mother had been, it's hard to be the spouse of a writer. I won't name names, but like if Alexandra was here, I mean, she's a writer too, but and my father had been a writer and hadn't quite made it professionally. And I mean, he had tons of books out and he got great reviews, but he hadn't made a fortune, and it was always disappointing for her. And then I come along, and I was very young when I sold my first novel, which was called Hard Laughter. But I think that she would, it would be confusing to her that I immediately, watching my father write, knew I was going to write when I grew up, like as a small girl. My dad made our breakfast every morning, and it's at 5:30 every morning. You'd hear tap, 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 tap from his study on his old Olympia. And I knew from 5 years old, he taught us you don't wait for inspiration. You don't wait to have great ideas. You just sit down, you get that day's work done. You know, no one cares if you're a writer. No one cares if I'm a writer. So I better. You better, and you all who are writing better, because really no one does. And I learned the habits, but I think that it was painful for my mom that the habits of my life were my father's. She went to law school when I was a teenager, so I mean, that's pretty heroic, right? She was in her 50s and everybody else was in their 20s, but the habits I learned of how to live I got from my father. I really have completely forgotten the question.
You and me both.
That was like a Donald Trump thing. That was like
we don't need to call these questions. We could just call them.
Okay.
So, did your father ever write about the family? I mean,
he didn't write a lot about the family. He wrote one book when Ronald. I'm a political activist, and my parents were too. And I just come by this naturally. So I mean, no offense to those of you who see things somewhat differently than I do politically. But he wrote a book when Reagan was governor. Reagan, who famously said that seen one redwood, seen them all. But it was called Anti-California, Report from Our First Para-Fascist State. And this is 50 years ago. Or many, many, many years ago. And it was, and he wrote a piece in it about living where we live. We live in Marin County, which is beautiful in the way Sun Valley, which is, stunning. And he wrote about the levels of drug addiction and alcoholism, which were the same levels as they were in where the Native Americans lived in East Oakland. Right, in this very wealthy enclave, and the levels of mental illness. And my brother and my friends, because it was the summer of love, and everybody was smoking pot. The husbands were leaving. The husbands had begun leaving in the early '60s. On the when Hefner comes out, and in my third grade class, there's not a single divorced child. It was one child named Melody, and it was like, whoa! It was like she was like a Martian, she had divorced parents. And by fourth and fifth grade, half of the kids had divorced parents. And so it was a very difficult, volatile, sexually charged, intense, addictive place to live. And he wrote a lot in that book about the life of people that were trying to get their outsides just perfectly burnished. And their lives fine-tuned, and it leaving them with a rate of suicide that was unfathomable. Several of my dad's best friends committed suicide. One of mine did. And so he wrote about us then, because he was coming to concerts, and he was coming and taking us to peace marches and concerts. But he didn't, that was, as I remember, all he wrote about. He didn't write personally. He didn't. He was very, very intellectual. My parents were atheists and intellectuals. Mm-hmm. Well, I was a kid with a lot of issues, I had OCD, but no one in the 50s, there was no consciousness that children could have mental illnesses, problems. And I was turning the light switches off the whole time I lived with them. Coincidentally, I stopped when I moved out at 17. And I had migraines at 5 years old, right? But with the OCD, I turned light switches on 17 times. And I couldn't turn them off one less or one more. And if there was any sound, I had to start over. 1, 2.
Did you hide that from people?
Oh yeah. Of course. And there was no thought that I was very, very, very sensitive, and I bet you were too. And most of us that were writers were like very sensitive. In the 50s, there was a book called The Overly Sensitive Child, which was about a way that the parents could begin to cope with having a child such as yourself, right? Because we're seeing the covers of the National Geographic, and there's famine, and we're crying, and where there's flies on children's eyes, And I can't go to the pound. I don't know about you, but I could not go to the pound with them to get the family cat or dog because I knew I was really smart, and I knew what happened to the other ones. And so there wasn't like a consciousness of, wow, this is a beautiful, beautiful way to be, to have a big open heart and be sensitive. The consciousness really before the women's movement was hide it, change it, be somebody completely different. And then everything will be better for you, and you'll be much more esteemed, and people will want to be with you. And so, but my dad wasn't writing about stuff like that. And when I started writing, which was pretty early on, I wanted to write about what it was really like here, because as soon as I would say something like that, whoever I was talking to, I would say, I can't go to the pound because I can't recover. They wouldn't go, really? That's crazy. All those puppies? They would go, oh, me too. It was a nightmare, And so that's what I wanted to write about, was the stuff that I was coming upon on the heels of the women's movement, which was people saying, I am grief-struck. I am enraged. That's what we talked about at the older women said, we're angry, we're grief-struck, we're starting from where we are now, we're in a bad mood. And then you all ate lentils. And but they were saying this is what's going to heal us, is to be who we actually are and to be the truth, to be the appropriate anger, to be the appropriate pain of grief of what's happened to our siblings and our parents and our children, pretending to be people that we weren't. And
have you gone back and looked at the early books you wrote? And
no, I never go back and
no,
read
I don't
my
either.
stuff. No.
Did you?
I haven't. The only reason I read this book, this little book you seem interested in, is my son Sam has a recording studio, and we got Random House. It was recorded by an actress 30 years ago. And Sam's company, which is called awritingroom.com, which we'll talk about later, not thewritingroom.com. Those are our rivals, and they are total losers. They're total losers. A waste of time and money. But anyway, awritingroom.com, lowercase. So Sam and his partner Reese taped me reading it, and I don't think I'd read it in 30 years. And so, if you've had to read your stuff.
Oh, you don't do it.
Part of you, your heart's in your throat because you're going, oh my God, where were my editors?
I know.
And then other parts of it, like I wouldn't have ever read False Starts. That would be the last thing I would choose to read to you today. But there were other parts of it, and I was going, God, that's really good. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Right? Like the lot of it I wrote because most writing books were about how, if you did this or that, this would surely meet with easy going and critical acclaim, right? And the books weren't saying, A, you're probably not going to get published, and B, if you do, you're going to be more mentally ill than you are right now, and C, it's going to be a whole different. It doesn't have what you're longing for, but the writing life does. The writing life will fulfill you and guide you and heal you and surround you. And no one had said that. It was all, if you do this and MFA, you should definitely get an MFA, and you should never do that, and outlines and all this stuff. So I just started writing this book about this is what it's like for me. Is that I sit down every morning and I feel doomed and I feel hopeless and I think, I think the well has run dry. I'm beating a dead horse and on, but I've learned the habits. You just do it.
Well, it's such an honest look at yourself and what the process really is, and then you're giving that to others who also you're urging them to look that way too. And,
yeah.
Do you have, now that Sam is fully grown without question, and you have a grandson, and my son's 18. Writers occasionally beget writers. It's an unfortunate evolutionary situation. And do you think about them writing about you? Because you have this poem in here that I absolutely love. Are we getting a family look over there?
He's tapping his watch like tick-tock.
All right. You hold the power, Sam. So this poem by Sharon Olds that you have, you and I both love this poem. It's called I Go Back to May 1937. Would you read it? Because it kind of taps into this some of the things we're touching on.
Sharon was here one very early year.
Wonderful poet.
Oh, my God. If you don't know about Sharon Olds, a New York City poet, and you don't know where to start, and you want to write, and you just want presence to voice at other people because these are such cold, weird times. Sharon Olds is just such a gift. So this is one of her poems I love. I see them standing at the formal gates of their colleges. I see my father strolling out under the ochre sandstone arch, the red tiles glinting like bent plates of blood behind his head. I see my mother with a few light books at her hip, standing at the pillar made of tiny bricks, with the wrought iron gate still open behind her, its sword tips black in the May air. They're about to graduate. They're about to get married. They are kids. They are dumb. All they know is they are innocent. They would never hurt anybody. I want to go up to them and say, stop, don't do it. She's the wrong woman. He's the wrong man. You are going to do things you cannot imagine you would ever do. You're going to do bad things to children. You're going to suffer in ways you never heard of. You are going to want to die. I want to go up to them in the late May sunlight and say it. Her hungry, pretty blank face turning to me, her pitiful, beautiful, untouched body, his arrogant, handsome, blind face turning to me, his pitiful, beautiful, untouched body. But I don't do it. I want to live. I take them up like the male and female paper dolls and bang them together at the hips like chips of flint as if to strike sparks from them. I say, do what you are going to do, and I will tell about it. Isn't that amazing? So,
thank you for reading that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's another thing that to me comes out of this book, which is so full of compassion and love and sadness and grief. But at the same time, there is underneath it, as for any writer, and probably particularly for women writers coming out, as Sharon was and you were, making your way during those years, there is ferocity, anger, ego, trying to claim something. There is love and there's threat, I will write about it, and wanting to live. And is that something do you feel more at peace with that yin-yang of the sort of ferocity and the compassion of it? Or does it, you've been writing about that journey for so long.
I feel partly because of recovery and partly because of getting older and partly because of being loved in a different way. I fell in love 8 years ago and got married 5 years ago, and I got protected. I got kind of found in a way that was different than me. My family, my son and sister-in-law, my wife-in-law. Wait, what is she again? Daughter-in-law. And I just think of her as my daughter because I got a girl out of this, And my grandson lived there, and so I have live on the property, and it just all sort of. I would say that things settled, the pond settled, the pond in my soul settled. And that there had been a lot more drama and trauma. and all through those years. And I just came this way. I'm really, really compassionate. I have a really tender, open heart. And I just came that way. And they tried, and the culture tried to get me not to be that way. And the battle cry was, you've got to get thicker skin, which is another way of saying you should just be a completely different person. That's not who I am. And I'm also what they used to call neurotic, you know. I'm really high-strung. I'm really sensitive. My feet, and I blunder, and I can just be emotionally a bull in a china shop. I can make everyone crazy, and I can make everyone worse, usually with my help, because I have very good ideas for how everybody could be doing better but you know, we say help is the sunny side of control, and I'm a little controlling, you know, and but all of it is better. You know, my need to control has dropped off about, well, Sam will probably disagree. I would say 80%, or at least it comes up, and I catch myself pretty early on. And I go, wow, was that disrespectful? Wow, was that? Neil, you know, I'll try to control him. I'll have good ideas for his life, and he'll kind of either pat me gently, or he'll walk along, you know, glumly, waiting for me to come to my senses. You know, release. So all of it, and I'm sure this is true for a lot of you that are 60 and older. You have all these ideas for other people. You have all this stuff, these things you want to try. You want people to do. You want to get them to do. You want to, or with your publisher, what they should be doing, or this or that. And I think this side of the grave, I'm going to have all that stuff that I had at 5, and I had earlier today. But it doesn't last very long as you get older. You kind of have a way of busting yourself gently, and you go, "That's okay. It's not A, it's not going to work, and B, who has the time, you know?" And plus, I think I need a nap. So, so I think that's the best way I can answer it. Is that age and a million great books and poems have helped the pond settle, and when I get roiled up, I have tools now, first of self-love, and of second of all, of making amends to people whose emotional acre I've barged onto. And then I can get on with my life, and there's something great to read. That's the secret of life. There's something great to read. You know, I'm good. You know, if there's something great to read, and I'll be talking about that much more later in the week, but if there's something great to read, it's just true. We're all here because we read and we write. And it's like, I'm good, right?
I know many of you probably have questions, and I want to leave a little time for that. And Annie and I were talking about just a bit of reading to finish with, and you suggested it's just the end of the book. It's the last section. It's called The Last Class. And of course, that last class continues as we sit here. But if you wouldn't mind reading that, and then we'll open it up for some questions. There are microphones, volunteers with microphones going around.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And if you don't want to stay for the questions, it's 20 minutes. I mean, it won't kill you. But, no, it's hot. And if you want to leave, I'm not taking names.
They could go get cataract surgery.
You can go find out. But I understand it's hot. So this is like 4 minutes, so settle in. This is the last few pages of Bird by Bird. The society to which we belong seems to be dying or is already dead. I don't mean to sound dramatic, but clearly the dark side is rising. Things could not have been more odd and frightening in the Middle Ages, but the tradition of artists will continue no matter what form the society takes. And this is another reason to write. People need us to mirror for them and for each other without distortion. Not to look around and say, look at yourselves, you idiots, but to say, this is who we are. In this dark and wounded society, writing can give you the pleasures of the woodpecker, of hollowing out a hole in a tree where you can build your nest and say, this is my niche. This is where I live now. This is where I belong. And the niche may be small and dark, but at last you will finally know what you are doing. After 30 years or more of floundering around and screwing up, you will finally know. And when you get serious, you will be dealing with the one thing you've been avoiding all along, your wounds. This is very painful. It stops a lot of people early on who didn't get into this for the pain. They got into it for the money and the fame. I certainly did. So they either quit or they resort to a type of writing that is sort of like candy making. Don't underestimate this gift of finding a place in the writing world. If you really work at describing creatively on paper the truth as you understand it, as you have experienced it, with the people or material who are in you, who are asking that you help them get written, you will come to a secret feeling of honor. Being a writer is part of a noble tradition, as is being a musician. It's the last egalitarian and open association. No matter what happens in terms of fame and fortune, dedication to writing is a marching step forward from where you were before, when you didn't care about reaching out to the world, when you weren't hoping to contribute, when you were just standing there doing some job into which you had fallen. Even if only the people in your writing group read your memoirs or stories or novel or poems, even if you only wrote your story so that one day your children will know what life was like when you were a child and you knew the name of every dog in town, still to have written your version is an honorable thing to have done. Against all odds, you have put it down on paper so it won't get lost. And who knows, maybe what you've written will help others, will be a small part of the solution. You don't even have to know how or in what way, but if you are writing the clearest, truest words you can find, and doing the best you can to understand and communicate, this will shine on paper like its own little lighthouse. Lighthouses don't go running all over an island looking for boats to save. They just stand there shining. You simply keep putting down one damn word after the other as you hear them, as they come to you. You can either set brick as a laborer or as an artist. You can make the work a chore, or you can have a good time. You can do it the way you used to clear the dinner dishes when you were 13, or you can do it as a Japanese person would perform a tea ceremony, with a level of concentration and care in which you can lose yourself, and so in which you can find yourself. Sometimes, no matter how screwed up things seem, I feel like we're all at a wedding. But you can't just come out and say, hey, we're at a wedding, let's have cake. You need to create a world into which we can enter, a world where we can see this. There was an old desert dog in Snoopy yesterday, in Peanuts, sitting with his back against a cactus, writing a letter to his brother, and said, at night, the sun goes down and the stars come out. And then in the morning, the sun comes up again. It's so exciting to live in the desert. And that's the wedding, right? To participate requires self-discipline and trust and courage, because this business of becoming conscious, of being a writer, is ultimately about asking yourself, how alive am I willing to be? The best thing about being an artist instead of a madman or someone who writes letters to the editor is that you get to engage in satisfying work. Even if you never publish a word, you have something important to pour yourself into. Your parents and grandparents will be shouting, don't do it, don't do it, don't sit down. And you'll have to do what you did as a kid, shut them out and get on with finding out about life. Then I look into my students' faces and they look solemnly back at me. So why does our writing matter again, they ask? Because of the spirit, I say, because of the heart. Writing and reading decrease our sense of isolation. They deepen and widen and expand our sense of life. They feed the soul. When writers make us shake our heads with the exactness of their prose and their truths, and even make us laugh about ourselves or life, our buoyancy is restored. We're given a shot at dancing with, or at least clapping along with, the absurdity of life instead of being squashed by it over and over again. It's like singing on a boat during a terrible storm at sea. You can't stop the raging storm, but singing can change the hearts and spirits of the people who are together on that ship. And we are together on that ship. Thank you. Thank you.
That was beautiful. This is a book to reread every few years. Questions for Annie? Raise your hand high, please. There's one in the back over there. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I fell in love with that book 30 years ago. I used it in class, every chapter, but I think my writing class, I think my favorite was shitty first drafts. Mm-hmm. Because you could never get students to do more than one draft or two drafts. But I said I will not receive any shitty first drafts. They have to be second or third draft.
Yeah.
Thank you for that wonderful book.
Yeah. You're welcome. Yeah, it's I still live by that. Yeah.
Right here in the fifth row.
So about a year ago, I came across a book in a secondhand store. It was an old Bird by Bird, and I opened it up, and it just so happened to be signed by you. And at the bottom of the page, it had a scribble of Sam Lamott. Uh-huh. And it took me a minute because I was like, this can't possibly be her son. Yeah. And it just occurred to me that, being a single mother, you probably had to take him to some of these book signings. So I kind of wanted to know if you wanted to say anything about parenting and being an author and how to balance those two tasks.
It was really hard, and I loved Sam so much more than I loved writing, and still do, by a million miles. But he did have to come along with me, and I think that was hard. It was hard to be the son of a writer who had to travel to make a living, and he did. My favorite story about parenting and writing was I did a big event in Chicago when Sam was about 5, and a very sweet one. I mean, this is such a different era, early 90s. It's such a gentler. It was the good old days. It was sweet and gentle, and it's gentler. And this woman with a little kid about Sam's age came up to me before I went on, and she said, Sam always had baggies of Legos. You'll remember this. He always had bags because he was a Lego master. And he had marking pens and paper to write on. He was always on the floor. And this woman came up and she said, my son's his age. There's a park across the street. Do you want me to take Sam? And I didn't think about it because I wasn't in that consciousness that it's all death and they'll probably kill him. I just thought, God, he'd go to a park for an hour with another 5 or 6-year-old boy. And so then it all worked. And she came back and then I had a signing. And so she said, the woman said, I make Play-Doh for, the flour and salt and water, Play-Doh and food coloring. I make it for my son, and we brought a bunch to see would he like to do it? Yeah, because he was an artist. He just came creative. He just was and is. And sculpey, and so then the woman said to me, and I thought this was very hostile, she said, do you make Sam's Play-Doh?
That is hostile.
Yeah. And I said, I don't make his dinner. And then she said to Sam, what do you eat? And he said, snack platters. Because we ate a lot of very good takeout. But because we ate like girl meals, like you eat at girl meals now. You'd have cheese and crackers and olives and pickles and some leftover noodles, and I just remember him saying, snack platters, just like that. But the thing is that it's hard, and that there was a huge amount of blessing in it for him. Certainly there was for me. It taught him what it meant to be an artist, and it's very real. It's not the happy horse shit you might see in a movie. It's hard, and you're tired a lot, and you don't make a lot of money for a long, long time, if ever. And people criticize you, and you get horrible reviews. And you go back to your room and you cry. And your little one sees you that you're crying, or that you're just exhausted. You're so depleted spiritually and psychically. And then you get up and you do it again. And you do it again with gratitude that you got one of the gold tickets from Willy Wonka, that you got to be a writer when you grew up. And Sam and his wife are writers. They got to be writers when they grew up. They started a company for writers when they grew up, because this is what Sam was good at, because I was a writer, and because that was what I honored. You know, that what I honored was the life of the artist and of the creative. So they started a company, awritingroom.com, but where they nurture writers, brand new writers and writers who have been published and who want to be published, 1,000 of them. And they meet every day online, and they give each other prompts, and they give each other encouragement, and they remind each other, shitty first drafts, bird by bird, index cards, pens. Here's a prompt that helped me yesterday. I couldn't write. I was stuck. I hated myself. Here's a prompt. Tell me 10 things. These are prompts directly from a writing room. Tell me 10 things you've forgotten. Right? That's going to be a day's work. Okay? Tomorrow, this is straight from awritingroom.com. Tell me 10 things you remember. You could write for 2 or 3 hours if you have that commitment to getting your work done, right? And that's what it means to be a writer. Here's a great prompt from a writing room. And anyone here who wants to be a writer, I can save you a lot of money. You don't even have to join, because this is so fabulous.
You had just wound it up, and now you're... All right, go ahead.
Okay, here's the prompt. But see, they're giving this to each other every day. 1,000 of them are just, and you can be one, or a kid can be one, or you can noodle around and probably get what you need for the day without joining, I think. I'm not sure. Here's the prompt. Okay, close your eyes. There was a tree. So, right? What was the tree you saw? When was it from? Was it from your childhood? Was it from this morning in Sun Valley? Was it when you asked your person to marry them? Was it when you found out that your grandfather was going to die? Where was your tree? What did it look like? What kind of tree was it? Well, I think it was a cypress, but I can't remember what they look like. Look it up. If you're writing, and this is really true at a writing room, if you're doing anything to further what you're working on, you get a full day's credit. Google cypress trees. What kind of birds are in cypress trees? What are their nests like? Do you remember that? You saw those nests when you were a child. And it's like that. And that's what he learned. And that's what he learned to love. And being a single mother was incredibly hard. And it was incredibly hard to be the child of a single mother. And to have to find fathers, which he found, some of them, which he found here. And he had 2 gay uncles. And he had my younger brother. And it was what it was. It was what we call life on life's terms. And it was hard. And it was what it was. It was how, God launched him. And so you do the best you can, and you're going to screw up right and left. And you put aside money for them to get a lot of therapy someday. Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Put your hand up high. There's a woman in the middle, or gentleman. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Anne, for that really engaging talk, and so warm and heartfelt. My question has to do with, I'm going to paraphrase, but in Bird by Bird, you say something to the effect of perfectionism, I think, is an enemy of the people. So I wonder if you could speak to perfectionism and writing, perhaps with regards to OCD or not.
The only place I teach anymore is a writing room. And one of the things I teach is a whole hour on perfectionism. So there's somebody holding up a sign in a really terrifying and aggressive way that we have 5 minutes left.
Todd's very nice, actually.
So you're going to have to go. Maybe there's some sort of trial membership you can get at a writing room, or you can just sign up for a month and get all of my talks and then get a refund. I'm sure you... Wait, will you two stand up so they can come talk to you afterwards? This is Claire Lamott and Sam Lamott, if you want to find out more about it. But Claire always moderates my talks, and we have both had the perfectionism because we were just such good girls, right? And some of you women here know what that meant. You have been the goodest girl about 20 minutes after you arrived here on earth. And with that came the perfectionism. That if you're going to do something, you better do it right. And you better not make mistakes. In our family, because we were atheists and intellectuals, you didn't get to change your mind. And so that you stuck with what you were doing, and you just had to do it right. So we have talked about this extensively. And I believe that perfectionism is the voice of the oppressor. And it will rob you of any chance you have of freedom and joy and the way out. And I can't even remember what we talked about in the talk, but it basically comes down to making more messes, making more failures. You know, there's that wonderful line of Samuel Beckett's, ever tried, ever failed. Try again, fail again. Try again, fail better. And that's what 1,000 people are doing for each other, is they're saying, it's never going to be good enough to send off. I think you're done. I think you should send it off today, because the perfectionism is beginning to hurt this story that you're sharing with me. You know, you're starting to hurt your material. And more than your material, you're starting to hurt your soul. And you can find a way, if you join into a community, and it can be at a community college, if you can find some collective, probably online now, where you get to work on this stuff, it's going to be about other people loving what you're doing and loving you and loving your stories as is, and responding in that way. This is great. I'll give you a sense of what the feedback might be if you were at any collective or here. It might be, I'm going to love this, right? And if somebody says to me, or especially when I was younger, I'm going to love this, I think, okay, well, this person is an asshole, and I hate them because they don't love it right now as is, and it's the best I can do, and I will never talk to them again, right? And then you get older and you realize, please tell me how to make this better, please. I mean, a desperation, please. But the person will say, I'm going to love this, and let me just tell you how I'm feeling right now about it. I feel like the first page and a half, and Claire and I have talked a lot about this too, the first page and a half is kind of clearing your throat. It got you into that cold creek, and then you warm up a little bit. I would ask you to consider starting it about halfway down on page 2. Okay? Try that, and and I also did a long talk with Claire at a writing room on writer's block. And the perfectionism and writer's block are first cousins. Because what's going to block you is the need to get it exactly right, to get it perfect. And so, there's ways out of the writing block. Jump ahead 50 pages. Just leave the place where you're stuck and go somewhere else. Introduce a character, a new character. See who they are. You can do the early work of getting to know who a person is. How do they stand? How do they dress? What do they look like? Where are we seeing them? What's the background of whatever? So the perfectionism, for me, is not only the hardest work we do as writers, i.e. to find a way to thwart that by making more messes, making more mistakes, falling on our butts more often, picking ourselves up. It's the most important work you can do as a human being.
I think that's a perfect